All right, guys, so why do I know that Craig Wright is Satoshi Nakamoto? The simple version. Well, it's simply like this. I worked at a company called Runtime Verification, and everything that I've proven and figured out mathematically, none of it's been disproven. Um, but there's no one from the company that comes and knocks on my door, calls me up, emails me, or anything and says, hey, we need to start building based on what you've figured out. We need to stop making the assumptions that you've showed that we've been making for no valid reason. Um, Nobody's apologized to me and said anything like, oh, oops, we judged you for no reason. We judged you, assumed that life was easy for you and that whatever grades we thought you should have gotten um, didn't actually have to be that because we didn't know what your living situation was. We want you to come try working for us instead of just hiring all these new interns, these other people with all these other things. Instead of looking at the code that I already wrote for them and saying, oh, wow, this actually works, we shouldn't have prejudged it. Could you explain it to us if we don't understand it, or could you help show it to someone else? There's zero people who've done any of that since I worked at that company, right? So it's the same thing that I noticed with Bitcoin. So I've noticed that the people who are like for BTC, or there's people, influencers, or people working at companies, there's everyone at Blockstream, and they all have the same exact like stance where they say like, oh, you need small blocks to have decentralization. And their assumption is that it's somehow better to like have less connections between. So if you have two nodes in a graph, like two different say servers, right? It's better in their mind to have not a connection between two nodes instead of to have an extra connection, right? So somehow they think that it's better to have less connections instead of more connections. Like that's somehow more decentralized. But it's not. More hops and more nodes doesn't mean more edges, more connections, and a harder network to break. Now, you might want to have a network like that for certain reasons, but not for Bitcoin specifically, because the algorithm is called a double spend check algorithm. Okay? And if you don't think it's called that, well, then I don't know what you want to call it, but that's what I'm going to call it because that's what it's doing. You have an algorithm that needs to be ran on the network, and it's a double spend checking algorithm. Now, the way a double spend checking algorithm works is it has to efficiently check for what's called a double spend. Now, these people don't seem to want to talk about that or acknowledge that that's the case. They want to pretend that there's something else going on, that there's somehow consensus is about something else. But it's not. A double spend checking algorithm means that you have to check the network for a double spend. And in order to do that efficiently, you want nodes that are all interconnected with each other like a complete graph. Now, the psychology behind this is that you have these people that sort of think that they know everything and they judge people based on something else. So, for example, when I realized it is actually simpler than just, it does include, listening to what, Charles Hoskinson would say, or what Vitalik would say, and what Nick Szabo would say, and realizing that none of it was ever backed up. None of it was debated. It was all just assumed by them. But there was something simpler. It was basically Craig Wright talks to or shows up around some Silicon Valley people, and they just look at the fact that he's wearing a suit, and they're like, "Oh, you're not a valid programmer. You're not genuine because you're wearing a suit." Okay, so this guy's wearing a suit, so therefore he's like CIA, and therefore he's going to control all your money, but not the guy, not Adam Back, who's being funded with billions of dollars uh, by Bilderberg Group, by the Federal Reserve, by MasterCard. No, not him. It's the guy in the suit who's seen some stuff, in his life, who's been around some stuff. Somebody who's worked his butt off to learn some stuff. It couldn't possibly be him who knows what he's talking about. So there's this prideful view where these people just judge other people based on their looks. Now, I was at University of Illinois, sitting down, minding my own business, and this guy who looks like he's homeless comes in there. Well, I didn't know, but I'm glad that I thought in the back of my mind, well, don't judge him. I mean, you don't really know who he is. Well, thanks. You can thank that guy for pretty much all free software licensing and all the GNU libraries and the fact that we don't have software that literally controls everything that we do and that there's actually some accountability, I'd say. So, yeah, it was Richard Stallman. I was in the same room with Richard Stallman, and I was young enough and not really learned enough to really know who he was. But I did luckily have a friend who knew who he was, who I talked with him at some point. I don't think he was necessarily there in the room at the time, but I mean, I had a pretty intelligent friend. But see, he also had a problem sometimes is thinking that he knew things that weren't necessarily known to be true. Okay, so this is the thing. You have to be genuinely humble, which is not something that other people are going to judge properly. They're going to think that the humble people are proud and the proud people are humble, okay? I'm talking about accepting the truth for what it actually is all of the time, regardless of what other people think about. So people might be like, wow, you're a jerk for saying that, but it's the truth. Or they might think that because you didn't say something that you're not smart or something like that. None of that matters. That's all perception. At the end of the day, what matters is what's true. And then you have theorems that prove things. And it doesn't matter how ridiculous people think they seem. Either they're true or they're not, is how it actually works. So you can have a drunk guy who looks like an idiot, who everyone thinks is dumb, who's homeless, who's poor, who's broke, who's lost all his teeth. But the theorem that he presents, if it's formally verified, then it's true. And then you got the guy in the nice clothes and got money, and he likes to talk smoothly and act cool. He's cool with the ladies, whatever it is. He's got 1,000 people liking everything he posts on Facebook, but then he doesn't actually prove his statement is true. He doesn't actually hold up to, he assumes something that isn't true and then builds everything on doing extra work that's unnecessary. Right? So the mechanics of it don't care at the end of the day. They don't care how popular you are. They care about the rules of the real game. That's how it actually works. So when you have these people like Adam Back and all these other people, and oh, the market decided that BTC wins. Okay, so what? Fine. The market can decide that they want cars that you literally have to put 10 million gallons of gasoline into the car in order for those cars to go 1 mile. Logistically, it's not going to work because how do you even get the trucks to bring the gasoline there when you can't afford to fill up the trucks with diesel when the alternative is a Honda Civic? Because that's 10 million gallons, by the way. It's not an exaggeration. This is the difference between the efficiency of BTC and BSV. Okay? So, take all that into account. Just think about how obvious this is. When you actually stand up, when you start standing up for real things in life, this stuff makes a lot of sense. It pieces together. And it doesn't mean you automatically know the conclusion to things. It's actually the opposite. It's actually a willingness to question, wait a minute, I think this, but I need to question what I'm thinking or what I'm feeling. And by doing so, it actually causes you to be better at determining what's true more efficiently because you were willing to do that in the first place, because you were willing to learn in the first place. So ironically, so the people who are willing to admit that they're wrong early on, they're willing to admit that they're wrong more often, more likely to do it. They end up being less wrong later on. And then some people will, it's the survivorship bias, right? They'll say, well, this guy never admits that he's wrong. Well, maybe he's always right. So when you actually look into it and be like, wait a minute, he's at literally, you check everything and you realize this guy's actually always like always right about everything. So of course he's not going to need to admit that he's wrong because he's actually always right. Whereas these other clowns are wrong and they still don't admit that they're wrong, and so they're still not learning how to be right in the first place. Because at the end of the day, it's not about how much you admit that you're wrong. It's actually about how right that you are, and admitting that you're wrong is how you get there in the first place. Or it could be how you get there in the first place. It's not even required, technically. You could just be right all the time, and that's not... Nobody should... if somebody condemns you for that, then it just shows how wrong they are, how prideful they are. Because they're against you being... They don't care about whether you're even right. They just care about how humble they want to perceive you to be, which is a complete... Don't let anyone gaslight you like that. No, when you're right about something and you did the genuine work, you're not making it up. You're doing your proper homework. And that's good. Don't let anyone look down on you for that. That should be supported, not attacked. There's too many people that will go out and attack you and act like you need to be humble when you actually genuinely are right. And that's wrong. So I'm going to put that out there. So when it comes to Craig, it's like you can verify so many anything that you want. You can go verify anything that you want. I'm not talking about signing keys and stuff. No, I'm talking about any question that's a valid question. Of like, okay, here's a debate about block size. Here's a debate about lightning. Here's a debate about Turing completeness. Did he answer all the questions? Yes. Did the other guy answer all the questions? No. Was he interrupting? No, he waited and responded to everything. Were the other people responding? No, they cut off their, the argument in between. They've never supported what they were actually saying. So if you actually do the research, if you actually do your homework, and you look into everything that Craig talks about and everything that he debates about, it doesn't mean that you can prove... It's like innocent until proven guilty, right? It doesn't mean that everything that you feel should be true automatically needs to be true. But everything that is testable, right? Like if you question, is he lying about this? Well, that means that you shouldn't be able to prove that he's lying. Even if it's hard to prove that he's telling the truth, right? Or that he's, you can see that he's finishing a debate, or you can back up a philosophical statement, right? So there's so many different ways to look at this. Socially, how to debate and how to approach determining what's true. But also there's technical, right? So I have a background in computer science and math, right? So I'm going to be suspicious of people who fall for fallacies, and I want to take real math because I know that you can't argue with the actual real math. You can't really fight that. You can't argue with that. It's different than opinions, though. And there's so many people who, and they're all BTC side, they'll always use opinions, right? They'll laugh. I've talked with someone who said they were laughed at for trying to define what decentralized meant. And that's one of the core things that needs to be brought up. What is that definition? So think about it. Think about the actual proof here, guys. All right. So I'm going to enjoy making my technology, which isn't the same as what runtime verification was doing. It's not the same because it's not just formally defining programming languages that have to be defined in text, but it's more general than that. That's the good thing. You get more out of real software synthesis when you're not required to have an unambiguous type theoretic programming language that has to be represented for no reason as text and then be converted using an algorithm for parsing and compiling. But they assume that. They're like, oh, you can make any language you want. So that's like saying, oh, you can use any positive natural numbers you want, but you can't. They don't know that there's other options. They think that they've got it all, and they don't. So, don't assume, right? Just like Einstein, his theory wasn't, people think of it as a new theory. No, it was putting down the assumptions. It was an assumption that time was constant. It's not a new thing to say, oh, time's not constant. No, it was a wrong assumption to be there in the first place. He's generalizing. He said, space-time doesn't need to be stretchy, but nobody proved that it was concrete, right? So he's just generalizing. He doesn't need to come up with a new theory. He doesn't need to prove anything. It's them who need to prove something. The burden of proof is on whoever is making the assumptions. That's how I know. That's because you can see who needs to actually approve something here. All these people telling Craig, you got to sign. But when you look at who's got the burden of proof of anything, all these guys trying to put him down, they have all this burden of proof on them that they can't prove any of their stances about anything. They try to assume that Bitcoin is not Turing complete when it already was. They try to assume that the blocks can't scale when it already can, and you can even show that it can. You can make a Merkle tree. You can horizontally scale. You can split up You can split up everything by their hashes and store it index it as many ways as you want, and it doesn't matter how many transactions you can shove, like 2 to the 100 probably, like it's nothing, and they assume that you can't do that. They assume all these things, but it's not their thing to assume. It was never proven. So just look at what's proven, and you'll see it all backs up. It backs up who he was and what he showed to be true, and how you do want traceability, but then privacy, and there's so many aspects to this is ridiculous. But it's only like the people who care about what's actually true that seem to figure this out and understand it. Because the people who don't care about what's actually true, and they always base things on opinions and all this stuff, and act like somehow magically evidence is instantly always going to support what they think is true, and it's not more difficult than that. Come on, guys. Use your minds. You got a mind for a reason. You got to use it. Life is not where you just drink a bunch of alcohol, forget about everything all the time. It is solving problems, building things, and learning and growing. So if you don't want to admit that you're wrong, like you have the desire to do it. That's the funniest part about it is my boss, Grigory Rosu at Runtime Verification. He would get annoyed when he thought, like, he would say things like, oh, if you want to work here, you got to admit that you're wrong. But like, he didn't live it. I didn't understand that. How can you be someone who, even convincing your wife to admit that she's wrong? Oh, nobody's going to show up here during Christmas. Oh, somebody did. Oh, I was wrong. Okay. But even he, like, doesn't do it deeply enough, because if he did, he would be happy to, he'd be excited to, and he'd be calling me up all the time. He'd be like, hey, teach me what is this thing, and trying to prove me wrong, or trying to show me, oh, maybe like your ideas are correct or whatever. But no, you just assumed that I was wrong. Assume that whatever it assume that all programming languages should be represented by text or whatever, and that you have to unparse into parentheses or something like that. But if you're not going to put your argument out there, then nobody can argue with it. Just like the guy who told me, hey, make this thing, and I've determined the most optimal way to do it, it's to not write a script at all. And when I ask him about it, he's like, well, it just doesn't say anything. Well, that's not my fault. It's not my fault if you assume that I don't want to do work, if I don't want to accomplish something because you think that I don't want to. When in reality, I do want to do my best, and I do want to do all the good work that I can possibly do, and I do want to be a good student and all these other things. But if I determine, oh, somebody told me to do this first, or this is a priority, or if I determine that the thing you told me to do is optimally done by not doing anything at all, that's not my fault. That's your problem that you need to figure out. And when I present it to you and you don't explain it back to me, if you don't show me that you understand it and you don't communicate about it, and then you tell me that I can't communicate, right? The problem's on you, not on me. So it's what I love about this is that everyone in BTC who doesn't get this, they assume that it's about that they're the ones who are communicating and doing their job. They're going to lose everything. And the people who are in BSV are going to get everything. Because they're willing to admit that they're actually willing to admit that they're wrong. They're actually willing to learn. Not fake.